There were 14 people sitting around that Christmas table when my son handed me an empty box. Not an overlooked gift, not a mix-up. A box with a red bow on top, my name written on the tag in my daughter-in-law Jennifer's handwriting, and nothing inside. I know it was nothing because I lifted the lid in front of all of them. I saw the bottom of the box, white cardboard, bare, not even tissue paper. And for about 3 seconds, the whole room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when something has happened that everyone recognizes but no one wants to name. My son Archie, 51 years old, sat at the head of the table his father used to sit at, and he didn't say a word. Jennifer, sitting across from me, smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile that knows exactly what it's doing. Archie's mother-in-law, Donna, got a pearl bracelet. Her husband, Roger, got a Craftsman tool set. The grandkids tore into piles of wrapped gifts. My 8-year-old granddaughter, Cora, still in her Christmas pajamas, looked over at my empty box and asked out loud in her small, honest voice, "Grandma, why is your box empty?" Nobody answered her. I set the box down on the table in front of me. I folded my hands. I looked at the centerpiece, a pine and berry arrangement Jennifer had ordered from a florist in Dayton, and I breathed because in that moment, I remembered something my husband Earl had told me 3 months before he died. He'd taken my hand across the kitchen table, the same table we'd sat at for 41 years, and he'd said, "Lindsay, I need you to promise me something. If the day ever comes when you feel like you have nothing left, call David Hargrove. He has something for me." I told him not to talk that way. He'd squeezed my hand and said, "Promise me." I promised, sitting at that Christmas table with an empty box in front of me and 14 people looking anywhere. But at my face, I understood exactly what Earl had been preparing for. He had seen this coming before I had. Let me take you back. Not to the beginning, because the beginning is too far, and we'd be here all day. Let me take you back to the woman I was before that Christmas. My name is Lindsay Hines. I'm 68 years old. I was born and raised in Springfield, Ohio, and I spent 31 years as a school librarian in the Dayton public school system. I know the Dewey Decimal System by heart. I know how to help a child find a book that will change their life. I know patience and I know quiet, and I know how to sit still when the world is loud. Earl Hines and I met at a church potluck in 1981. He was 28. I was 25. He brought a green bean casserole that was honestly terrible, and he knew it was terrible, and he laughed about it before I even tasted it. I married him 11 months later. Earl worked for the same insurance company, Midwest Fidelity, for 35 years. He was a claims adjuster. Not glamorous work, careful work, detail work. Earl was the kind of man who read the fine print on everything, not because he was suspicious, but because he believed that the fine print was where the truth lived. We had one child, Archie, born in 1973. He was a good boy, quiet like his father, stubborn like me. He did well in school, studied business at Ohio State, and got a job managing operations for a regional logistics company. Steady work, good salary. We were proud. He met Jennifer at 34. She was 31. She was sharp, organized, and confident in a way that filled any room she walked into. At the time, I called it presence. I admired it, honestly. I told Earl on the drive home from their first dinner together, "She's going to keep him on his toes." Earl had nodded slowly, the way he did when he was thinking more than he was saying. They married in 2009. The wedding was beautiful. I cried at the altar. Jennifer's mother, Donna, hugged me and said, "We're family now." I believed her. The first few years were fine. We had Sunday dinners. We went to Archie and Jennifer's home for holidays. Earl and Archie watched football. Jennifer and I talked gardens. We were not a close family in the way some families are, the kind that calls every day, that drops by unannounced, that shares everything. But we were steady, respectful, present. Then Earl got sick. He was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in the spring of 2020. We thought we had more time than we did. The doctors said years. It turned out to be 22 months. I am not going to dwell on losing Earl, because this story isn't about grief. But I will tell you this. When Earl was sick, Jennifer ran things. She organized the medical appointments. She communicated with the doctors. She managed the calendar of who visited and when. At the time, I was exhausted and scared, and I was grateful. I told her so. What I didn't see, what I didn't let myself see, was that Jennifer had learned something during those 22 months. She had learned how this family worked when Lindsay wasn't watching. Earl died on a Tuesday in March of 2022. He died at home, in our bedroom, with his hand in mine. It was as peaceful as death can be, which isn't very peaceful, but it was his. The first thing Jennifer did, the very first thing, before the obituary was written, was call Archie into the kitchen and close the door. I was in the living room with Earl's sister Carol. I didn't hear what they said. But within the week, Jennifer had appointed herself the person who handled arrangements, funeral arrangements, legal arrangements, communication with Earl's attorney. She told me,
"You shouldn't have to deal with all of this right now, Mom. Let us handle it."
I was 66 years old, numb with grief, and I let her. That was my mistake. Over the next several months, small things shifted. Holiday planning moved from my house to theirs. Archie stopped calling me on Sunday evenings the way he had for years. When I called him, he picked up, but the calls got shorter. When I mentioned visiting, Jennifer would say they had a lot going on, maybe in a couple weeks. A couple weeks became a month. A month became longer. I told myself it was the season of grief. Families pull apart when someone dies. It takes time to find a new rhythm. I gave it time. But the thing I noticed, the thing I couldn't explain away, was how Jennifer spoke to me. It was never rude. That's important to understand. Jennifer was never openly unkind. It was more of a tone. The tone you use with a person who doesn't quite understand things anymore. Gentle, patient, slightly simplified. She started making decisions and telling me about them afterward. They were going to spend Thanksgiving at Donna and Rogers. She was letting me know. They were planning a family vacation to Myrtle Beach in June. Just the four of them. She was letting me know. Archie's company Christmas party was on the same night as my library retirement dinner. They'd try to make it work. She was letting me know. Every statement ended the same way. She was letting me know. Not asking. Not including. Informing. Archie never corrected it. I don't think he saw it. Archie is not a complicated man. He loves his wife. He trusts her to manage the household. He always has. And Jennifer managed the household, which now included me, as something to be scheduled and maintained, not consulted. I brought it up once, in October of 2022, 7 months after Earl died. I called Archie, and I said, "I feel like I'm being left out of things, Archie. I feel like I don't hear from you unless Jennifer sends me a calendar update." There was a pause. Then,
"Mom, Jennifer works really hard to keep everyone connected. I don't think you realize how much she does."
That was the end of that conversation. I hung up and sat with it for a long time, alone in the house Earl and I had shared for 39 years, in the quiet that only exists after 41 years of someone else being in the rooms with you. I sat and I thought about the word alone. I had no idea then how much Earl had already done to make sure I wouldn't be. I want to be honest with you, because honesty is the whole point of this story. I missed the signs. Not because I was foolish. Not because I was senile. I missed them because I trusted my son. and trust has a way of making the obvious invisible until it isn't anymore. The first sign came in June of 2022, 3 months after Earl passed. Archie called me on a Wednesday evening, pleasant and casual, and said that he and Jennifer had been talking with a financial advisor, a colleague of Jennifer's from her company, and they thought it might be smart to refinance the house to consolidate some of Earl's outstanding debt and simplify the estate. I asked what outstanding debt. Archie said just some things, medical balances, a home equity line Earl had opened a few years back. Nothing major, but cleaner to wrap it all together. He said he had the paperwork. He'd bring it by that weekend. The paperwork was long. I am not an attorney. Earl had always handled the financial documents. I read it as carefully as I could, but the language was dense and Archie was sitting across from me explaining each page in his calm, unhurried voice, and Jennifer had made coffee, and the afternoon sun was coming through the kitchen window the way it always did. And I signed. I signed on 6 different lines. I don't know exactly what I signed. I know what I was told I signed. What I was told was a refinancing to simplify the estate. What I later learned was that several of those signature lines had shifted the title of the property in ways I did not understand and had not agreed to in any meaningful, informed sense. The second sign came in September of that same year. Earl's fishing cabin in Harlan County, Kentucky. Earl loved that cabin. He'd owned it since 1998. 2 acres on a quiet creek, a small dock, a screened porch where he'd sit and read on summer mornings. We'd gone there every summer for 20 years. I had my own coffee mug there. I knew which floorboard creaked. Archie told me the county was changing property tax assessment methods, and that having the cabin in a trust or a single name rather than the estate would protect it from complications. He recommended putting it in his name temporarily, just to protect it, just until things settled. I asked Earl's attorney about it, but I called the wrong number. I called the general line for Midwest Fidelity, the insurance company, not David Hargrove's office. It was a mistake anyone could make. I got a voicemail. I left a message. Nobody called back. I told myself I'd follow up. I didn't follow up. And so by the time Christmas came, 22 months after Earl's death, my son owned the cabin. The house had been refinanced under terms I didn't fully understand. And I was sitting in a house that felt like mine, but had paperwork that told a different story. I didn't know any of that on Christmas morning. I only knew that my box was empty. It was December 23rd. Archie and Jennifer held Christmas 2 days early because Jennifer's parents were traveling to Florida on the 26th, and the timing worked better for everyone. That phrase, worked better for everyone, was Jennifer's. It always was. I drove to their house in Centerville from my home in Dayton. 40 minutes. I brought a 7-layer salad and 2 pies, pecan and apple, because that's what I've brought to Christmas for 40 years, and I saw no reason to change. I wore my red cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons Earl gave me the Christmas before he got sick. Donna and Roger were already there when I arrived. Their coats were on the hall bench. Their voices were coming from the living room, warm and comfortable, the voices of people who had been expected. Jennifer met me at the door. She was in a green dress, hair done, earrings I hadn't seen before. She took my pies and said, "Oh, Lindsay, you didn't have to bring all this," in a voice that made clear she found it slightly excessive. I smiled and said, "I always bring pie." She smiled back. The living room had a tree that touched the ceiling. Gifts were stacked underneath, color-coded with ribbon, blue for Archie's in-laws, red for the grandchildren, gold for Archie and Jennifer themselves. I looked for my color. There wasn't one. My gift was set apart on the side table, near the lamp. 1 box. Red bow. Smaller than I expected. The grandchildren, Cora, 8, and her older brother Tyler, 11, were chasing the dog through the hallway. Archie was at the kitchen counter opening a bottle of something. He waved when he saw me. He didn't come to hug me until I walked to him first. We ate. The food was good. Jennifer is an organized cook. Everything timed and plated properly. I complimented the sweet potatoes. Donna told a story about their trip to Hilton Head. Roger asked Tyler about football. The meal was pleasant in the way that meals are pleasant when everyone is performing pleasantness. Then Jennifer said it was time for gifts. Donna opened her pearl bracelet and teared up. Roger held up the tool set and said it was exactly what he needed. The grandchildren shrieked over their things. Tyler got new gaming equipment. Cora got a craft kit the size of a small suitcase. Archie handed me the box. I remember the weight of it. Light. Too light. The way it moved when I tilted it, nothing shifted inside. But I told myself not to assume. I told myself maybe it was something small. A gift card in an envelope. A piece of jewelry in a tiny pouch. I lifted the lid. White cardboard. Empty. I looked up at Archie. His eyes went to the window. Jennifer said, brightly, like she'd prepared the words.
We wanted to do something really meaningful for you, Mom. We're putting together a memory book, photos of you and Earl family milestones, but we wanted to present the box now so you'd know it was coming.
I looked at her. She held my gaze. Calm. Practiced. The memory book would never arrive. I knew it in the way, certain things in your body, before your mind has finished processing them. There was no memory book. There was a box, and it was empty, and that was the point. Cora was the only honest person in the room. She looked over at me with her big, solemn eyes and said, Grandma, why is your box empty? And the room did not answer her. I set the lid back on the box. I folded my hands on top of it. I said, It's lovely, Jennifer. Thank you. I held that posture for the rest of the afternoon. I left at 4 p.m., earlier than usual. I said I was tired. Jennifer hugged me at the door, perfunctory, her arms going around me briefly before releasing. Archie walked me to the car. He said, Drive safe, Mom. Roads might be icy. I said I would be careful. He went back inside before I'd started the engine. I drove home on roads that were not icy at all in the long December dark, with an empty box in my passenger seat. And somewhere on Route 35, I said out loud to no one, to Earl, maybe to the empty car, to myself, Earl, I think it's time. I had nothing left to wait for. The box had made that clear. I called David Hargrove the morning of December 24th. I had his number written in Earl's handwriting on an index card tucked in the back of the household address book. Earl had put it there himself. He'd shown it to me one afternoon about a year before he died, casual as anything, the way he showed me where the backup water shutoff was and where he kept the car insurance policy. Practical. No drama. That's Hargrove's number. He handles the will and a few other things. If you ever need him. I'd said fine and gone back to whatever I was reading. I called the number on Christmas Eve morning. I didn't expect anyone to pick up. Someone picked up on the second ring. Hargrove and Associates, this is Karen. I said I was Lindsay Hines, and I was calling for David Hargrove. I said my husband Earl Hines had been a client, and that he'd told me to call if I ever needed to. Karen put me on a brief hold. When she came back, she said Mr. Hargrove had a note in Earl's file that if a Mrs. Lindsay Hines ever called, she was to be connected immediately, no matter the day. David Hargrove picked up 30 seconds later. His voice was steady and unhurried, the voice of a man who has delivered news, good and bad, for a very long time without getting rattled by either.
Mrs. Hines, I've been expecting your call. I'm glad you reached out.
I told him about the Christmas party, the box. I told him I was concerned about some documents I'd signed after Earl died. I told him about the house refinancing and the cabin. There was a brief silence.
Mrs. Hines, I need you to come to my office. There's quite a bit to go over, and it's better done in person. Your husband was a very deliberate man. He started working with me 4 years before his passing. He anticipated several things that I believe are now relevant. It's important.
I drove to Columbus on December 26th. I wore my good coat. I brought a notepad because Earl always said to bring a notepad when numbers were being discussed. David Hargrove's office was on the 4th floor of a building on North High Street near the Ohio State campus. He was in his late 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and a firm, dry handshake. His office had bookshelves on every wall and a window that looked out over a parking garage, which somehow made it feel more trustworthy than a view would have. He sat across from me and opened a file that was considerably thicker than I expected.
Earl came to me in the spring of 2018, he said. He said he wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, you would be fully protected, financially, legally, and in terms of your housing. He was concerned about Archie, or more specifically, about the influence of certain individuals around Archie. He wasn't angry. He wasn't dramatic about it. He said it was a pattern he'd observed over several years, and that he wanted to be prepared rather than reactive.
Earl had been watching, quietly, carefully, the way he read the fine print on everything. He had been watching, and then he had acted. I want you to understand who Earl Hines was, because what he built for me didn't come from wealth or power or legal sophistication. It came from a man who spent 35 years reading the fine print, a man who paid attention, a man who loved his wife in the quietest, most permanent way, not with declarations, but with preparation. This is what Earl had done. In 2018, he established what David Hargrove called a revocable living trust. He transferred the family home into that trust, not into Archie's name, not into a joint account, into a trust that I was the sole beneficiary of, and that Archie had no legal access to without my consent. When Archie brought me those refinancing papers in June of 2022, he had either not known the house was in a trust, or he had hoped I didn't know. David Hargrove reviewed the documents I'd signed. 2 of the signature lines were invalid because they required a trustee signature, not simply an owner's signature. The refinancing in its current form was not legally binding. The house was still mine. The cabin in Kentucky, Earl had handled that in 2019. He had placed it in the trust as well, with explicit language stating it could not be transferred to any family member without Lindsay Hines's written consent, witnessed by an attorney. Whatever Archie had filed in Harlan County was done without legal authority over that property. David pulled out a manila folder and set it in front of me. Your husband also hired a private investigator in 2020 during his illness. I stared at the folder. Earl said he wanted documentation. He wasn't planning to use it against anyone. He said he wanted it to exist in case it was ever needed. He said, if I'm wrong about everything, the file sits in a drawer. If I'm right, Lindsay will need it. The file contained records going back to 2019, timestamps on financial account logins that didn't match my location or Earl's, copies of correspondence, records of calls made from our home landline to Donna and Rogers, numbered during the hours Earl was at his cardiologist, calls made while I was supposedly alone in the house, but that I had not made. There was also a letter. David handed it to me in a sealed envelope with my name on it in Earl's handwriting. I didn't open it in the office. I put it in my purse, thanked David Hargrove, and walked down 4 flights of stairs instead of taking the elevator because I needed the time. I opened the letter in my car. It was 2 pages, handwritten. I'm not going to read you every word because some words belong only to me, but I'll tell you what he said. He said he was sorry he couldn't stay longer. He said he had watched for several years as someone worked to make me smaller, and that he had not said more because he didn't want to force me to choose between my husband's perception and my own loyalty to my son. He said that he hoped he was wrong about everything, and that if I never needed to make that call to David Hargrove, he would be glad of it. And then he wrote, But if you're reading this in the hard way, Linz, I want you to know that you are taken care of. Everything we built together is still yours. I made sure of it. You spent 41 years making sure I was never cold, never hungry, never without someone to come home to. It was the least I could do. At the bottom of the second page, in letters he'd pressed hard enough that I could feel them with my thumb, you were the best thing in my life. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Not even Archie. Not even me from the grave. You know your own worth. Act like it. I sat in that parking garage on North High Street, and I cried for 20 minutes. Not from grief. Not from anger. From something that doesn't have a clean name. The feeling of being caught by someone who is no longer there to hold you. And then I dried my face, started the car, and drove back to Dayton. There was also one more thing. The thing I hadn't known about at all. For 15 years, Earl had made small, consistent deposits into a separate account. Not large amounts. $50 here, $100 there, the occasional windfall from a work bonus or a tax refund. He had never mentioned it. It had grown, with interest and time, to just over $94,000. The account was in my name only, had always been in my name only, and had never been accessible to anyone else. Earl hadn't told me, because he was afraid I'd tell Archie. Not out of malice, because I trusted Archie completely and had no reason not to. Earl knew that. He also knew that trust in the wrong hands becomes a door left unlocked. He left it locked. For me, David Hargrove sent the formal trust documentation to Archie on the 2nd of January. It was a certified letter, return receipt required. David told me later that it was signed for by Jennifer. Archie called me that same evening. I let the phone ring twice before I picked up. Not to be cruel, I just needed 2 rings to decide what kind of conversation I was going to have. I decided on the honest one. Mom. His voice was different than I'd heard it in a long time. Tight. Off balance. Hi, Archie. We got a letter from an attorney. I know. A pause. Did you hire someone to? No. Your father hired someone. For years ago. He just made sure I knew where to find him. A longer pause. I heard him exhale. I heard the background noise of his house, the television somewhere, a cabinet closing. Jennifer was there. I knew she was there. Mom, there are things I need to explain about the paperwork we had you sign. Archie. I kept my voice level. Not cold, not sharp. Level. I don't need you to explain the paperwork. David Hargrove explained the paperwork. What I need you to tell me is whether you knew those signature lines were invalid when you put them in front of me. Silence. Archie. I'm not sure I understood all of it. That was not a denial. I breathed. I thought of Earl's letter. You know your own worth. Act like it. Here's what I'm going to tell you, I said. I'm not going to go back and forth with you about who understood what. I'm not going to get a lawyer involved unless something forces me to. But I am going to say this once, clearly, so there's no confusion. I am your mother. I am not a problem to be managed. I am not an inconvenience that needs to be worked around. I am not someone who can be handed an empty box in front of 14 people and expected to smile about it. I loved your father for 41 years, and I built a life with him, and I am not going to spend whatever years I have left being made to feel like I'm imposing on my own family. If you want a relationship with me, a real one, it starts with you telling me the truth. Not today. I'm not asking for it today because I don't think you're ready, and I know I'm not ready to hear it without being angry. But when you are, I'm here. I'll pick up. He said, Mom, I love you, Archie. I said, that's not in question. Good night. I hung up. Jennifer did not call. I hadn't expected her to. What I hadn't expected was the call I got 3 days later from Cora. My 8-year-old granddaughter called me from Archie's landline on a Saturday afternoon. I recognized the number and answered immediately, wondering if something was wrong. "Grandma? Hi, baby. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I just wanted to call you. You called all by yourself?" Dad showed me how to use the phone for real calls, not just FaceTime. A pause. "Grandma, I've been thinking about your box. The one that was empty at Christmas." I gripped the phone. I asked Daddy why it was empty, and he said it was complicated. But I don't think it should be complicated. If you love someone, you put something in the box. I had to set the phone against my chest for a moment and breathe. "You're right," I said when I could speak. "You're absolutely right. If I had a box to give you," Cora said, "it would be full. I'd put a rock in it from the creek and one of my drawings and the photo I took of us at the apple orchard. Would that be okay?" I said that would be the best box I'd ever received. I cried after I hung up, not the jagged, grief-soaked crying of the car in Columbus. The other kind, the kind that releases something instead of breaking it open. Cora is 8 years old, and she already understood the thing that it took the rest of her family 40 years to miss. Love is not complicated. Love shows up. Love puts something in the box. I want to tell you where I am now, because I think that matters more than the resolution of the legal pieces, though I'll give you those too. The house is mine. Fully, clearly, without dispute. David Hargrove notified Archie's contact that the refinancing documents were invalid and that no further attempts to alter the property title would be entertained. There was no lawsuit. Archie did not push back. I think, in the end, he was relieved to have it settled clearly. The way people are sometimes relieved when the thing they knew was wrong is finally named out loud, and they don't have to pretend anymore. The cabin in Kentucky is mine as well. I drove down in February, in a year that hadn't fully made up its mind about being cold yet. I sat on the dock. I watched the creek. I had Earl's coffee mug with me, the blue one with the cracked handle that he never let me throw away. I filled it with gas station coffee, and I sat on that dock for an hour in the February chill, and I talked to Earl the way you talk to people, when you're not sure if they can hear you, but you say it anyway. I told him I found the account. I told him I called David Hargrove. I told him the letter made me cry in a parking garage. I told him I was going to be okay. The account, the $94,000 he'd built over 15 years of small, quiet deposits. I used part of it to do something Earl and I had talked about since we were in our 40s. I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, not because I was running away, not because I was angry at Dayton or at the house or at the memories, but because Earl and I had a list, an actual list on a notepad page folded in half, tucked in the front pocket of his overnight bag that I still haven't fully unpacked. The list was titled, in his handwriting, Places for After. Asheville was circled, twice. I bought a small house on a quiet street 3 miles from the center of town. 1 story, 2 bedrooms, a front porch that faces west, so I get the afternoon light. I planted a kitchen garden. I joined a book club that meets on Thursday evenings at a woman named Ruth's house, and Ruth makes the best cornbread I've ever tasted. And we read novels about women who make difficult choices, and we talk about them like they're our own. I take a watercolor class on Tuesday mornings at a community arts center downtown. I am not good at it yet. I don't care. Earl always said I should try painting. He was right, the way he was right about most things I didn't listen to quickly enough. Archie and I talk. Not every week. Not the way it used to be. And not the way I wish it had been. But honestly, the calls are shorter, but they're real. He told me in March that he was sorry about the empty box. Not a big speech. Not a rehearsed apology. He just said it, plain, one Sunday evening. "Mom, the box was wrong. I should have said something." I told him I appreciated that. I told him I loved him. I did not tell him it was okay, because it wasn't okay, and pretending otherwise would have been another kind of empty box. But I told him the door was open. I told him Cora could call me anytime she wanted, for any reason, from a real phone or FaceTime or a handwritten letter, however she chose. Cora sent me a drawing in February, a woman standing in a garden with flowers that were much larger than the woman, which is exactly how a garden should feel, I think. She labeled it, in her careful second-grade printing, Grandma's House. It is on my refrigerator. It will be there until the day I die. Jennifer has not called. That is also an answer. Not a loud one, but a clear one. The empty box is on my kitchen windowsill. I know that sounds strange, but I kept it. I washed it and set it on the sill next to my African violets, where the morning light comes through. It's not a wound, and it's not a trophy. It's a reminder. Every morning when I make my coffee and I see that box in the window light, I think about what it cost me to get here. I think about Cora asking why it was empty, the only person in that room who understood that the question needed to be asked. I think about Earl in a lawyer's office in 2018, quiet and deliberate, reading the fine print on my future. So I wouldn't have to. I think about who I was when I walked into that Christmas dinner, a woman who had spent 2 years slowly, politely, graciously making herself smaller in order to keep the peace. And I think about who I am now, a woman with a deed in her own name, a view of the western sky, Earl's coffee mug by the sink, and 94,000 proofs that someone loved her enough to plan ahead. I'm not telling you this story, so you'll be angry at Archie, or at Jennifer. I'm telling you this story because I know some of you have been sitting at your own table with your own empty box. Maybe it wasn't wrapped with a red bow. Maybe it was a holiday where your phone didn't ring. A family photo you weren't included in. A decision made about your own life without you in the room. A conversation that started with "we thought it would be easier if," and ended with your needs being quietly removed from the equation. If that's you, I want you to hear this. You are not imagining it. You are not being difficult. You are not being unreasonable by expecting to be treated with the same basic dignity you have spent your whole life offering to everyone else. The women who love us, who truly, quietly, permanently love us, they don't always wear their love loudly. Sometimes they sign paperwork in a lawyer's office and keep a file in a drawer and make small deposits over 15 years and write us letters they hope we'll never need. Sometimes love looks like preparation. Sometimes it looks like a brass key pressed into your palm at the right moment. Sometimes it looks like 4 words in a card with no return address. I should have known. Earl Hines was not a perfect man, but he paid attention. He did the one thing that mattered. He refused to leave me unprotected. And Cora, 8 years old, Christmas pajamas, completely unbothered by the pretense in that room, said the truest thing anyone said that day. If you love someone, you put something in the box. I am 68 years old, and I am building the second half of my life in a small house in Asheville with a kitchen garden and a watercolor class and a book club and a granddaughter who draws flowers bigger than people. Earl gave me the ground to stand on. I'm the one deciding what to build on it. And if nobody has told you today that you still have ground to stand on, now you know. That was my story, and I'd like to hear yours. If you've ever been handed an empty box by a child, a spouse, a sibling, anyone who should have known better, leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and you deserve to be heard. If this story felt familiar, share it with someone you think needs it today. Sometimes the right words at the right time change how a person sees the next chapter of their own life. And if you want to hear more, click the next video on your screen.